Hello everyone, this is Jack. Well, in this video I'm going to show you what happens when you don't stake or prune your tomatoes. Now I planted tomatoes in these rows where we're going to plant more raspberries and blackberries next year. So I made all of these rows, made all of these berms. We put down a lot of organic fertilizer, a lot of compost, a lot of manure, and then I didn't want this space to just go uncultivated. So I planted lots of squash, tomatoes, chilies, and all other vegetables in here this year. So next year the vegetable garden is going to be another place, and we're going to have raspberries and blackberries here. So we planted about 4 rows of raspberries, and there are 50 plants each in each row. So the row is 150 feet long, so every 3 feet there's a plant. However, I didn't have enough time to stake these tomatoes or to even prune these tomatoes, so they have become giant bushes. And let me show you what happens. And we're just getting done putting up all of these trellises for raspberries. We're getting prepared to plant raspberries next year, so we're gonna order some more bare root raspberries as well. But let me show you around, take you on a little tour, and show you what not to do. So that's what this video is about. So let's get started. So this is what happens when you don't stake your tomatoes. So this tomato plant is loaded with tomatoes and it's just falling over. And all the weight from the tomatoes is making all the branches lean over and touch the ground. And let me show you what happens when the tomatoes touch the ground as well. So here's a tomato. It's a perfectly good tomato, but look at that. There's a hole right there. There's a hole there. Look at the hole right there. Such a nice big tomato, and there are probably like 20 tomatoes on that plant. And I just picked this off from that plant, and this is inedible because the bugs are probably either the earwigs or the caterpillars. They made a hole in there. So the tomatoes should never touch the ground. This tomato plant just flopped over like this, and it's loaded with tomatoes as well. So let me be very careful and lift this up and look at these tomatoes. Look at how many tomatoes are on just one plant. And I didn't even prune any of the suckers on this, so there are lots of sucker growing all over this, and they're bearing flowers too, and more tomatoes are growing. So look at all these tomatoes in here. So here's the main stem of the plant, and here's another stem. Here's the sucker. Look at the sucker. The sucker itself has seven tomatoes on it. And here's another sucker that has 6 to 7 tomatoes too. Well, look at these 2 rows. They're filled with tomato plants, and I have about 50 tomato plants. We planted about 5 different varieties of tomato plants, and there's a lot of tomatoes on these. We actually pick in everywhere to 5 to 6 pounds of tomatoes every single day, and most of them are not even ripening yet. So I didn't prune any suckers. I let the suckers grow. Usually I'll prune the suckers and I'll keep my tomato plants neat and tidy. I'll show you those as well. They are behind our house. I only planted about 7 to 8 per row, and usually I'm out there watering my blueberries and other stuff, so I can actually pay attention to them. However, out here, I was so busy with everything that's going on the farm. We're planting raspberries, blackberries. I'm preparing for blueberries as well. So I didn't get any chance or any time to prune these tomatoes or stake these tomatoes. But they're still producing a lot of tomatoes, and they're kind of becoming unmanageable. You actually have to go in there, try to find tomatoes in there, and as you lift up the plants, you try to find tomatoes. So this is the tripod style tomato trellis that I put in the garden behind our house. And this type of trellis is really easy to put in, and it works really well. I put a string on each of the branches of the tomato plant and then tie it up to the tomato trellis. I made a separate video on how to set up this tomato trellis. Check the video out if you're interested. I'll leave a link to the video in the description. Well, look at this plant. All of this tomato plant has just toppled over this way, and it just couldn't bear the weight of all the tomatoes that are on here. This tomato plant should be upright like this, so you can actually get to all the tomatoes, and all the tomatoes are off of the ground. However, we did put some stakes in here. We did that today, and I'm going to stick it up so most of these tomatoes are off of the ground and we can save most of these tomatoes. So there's still time to do that. However, never let your tomato plants topple over like this and all the tomatoes are just laying on the ground. Now another issue if you don't prune your tomatoes is that you get lots of tomatoes, but you get smaller tomatoes because the energy produced by the plant gets distributed into a number of tomatoes rather than select tomatoes. So you get smaller tomatoes, but lots of tomatoes versus fewer tomatoes and large tomatoes. So these tomatoes are a little bit smaller, so they are kind of staying above ground. You know, they are not really hitting the ground, and they are all good. They're all good eating. So these are actually doing really good. But again, I'm going to get them up and stake them up so that, you know, they don't get eaten by bugs or they don't rot. Grab a tomato from here. Check it out. Look at all the bug marks. So the bugs are getting into them. These are either caterpillars or they're earwigs that are getting into the tomatoes and eating the tomatoes. So you do lose some tomatoes if you don't stake your tomatoes and tomatoes touch the ground, especially if you have water there. I'm gonna take it off the vine anyway because look at the tomato. The tomato got split because of overwatering, and then bugs bore into it and started eating it. So this tomato is also discarded. So I'm losing quite a few tomatoes because I did not stake my tomatoes. Well, this tomato plant is going through the same thing. It's a really big bush, lots of flowers on there, lots of green tomatoes are on here. And if I lift this up, let's see if I can find any ripe tomatoes. So another issue that I have is tomato branches are very brittle. So I have to be very careful when I lift this up. I have to lift the whole plant up. If I try to just lift one branch, there's a chance the branch might break. So that's another reason why you should be staking your tomatoes. So we'll check out the size of this tomato plant and look at all of these tomatoes underneath. Look at big tomatoes. This is bigger than my hand right here. That's how big this tomato is. And I didn't prune any suckers. It's just growing naturally like it would. And there's so many offshoots from these tomatoes filled with flowers and tomatoes growing everywhere, but you actually have to kind of go in there and try to find tomatoes and get your way in there. It's sometimes really hard to reach tomatoes. Sometimes you can't see the tomatoes. This tomato plant is out of control and it's like a big bush, and if I have to find tomatoes in here, I have to kind of go in there, lift some of the branches up and find a nice tomato. Look at this Cherokee purple tomato. Let me come closer. Check this out. Really nice Cherokee purple tomato here. So here's a cracked tomato, and let me pick it up. So it's kind of ripe, a little bit overripe, and due to excess water, this cracked up. So one thing you can do to prevent cracking of tomatoes is pick them a little bit on the less ripe side, a little bit on the raw side. So as soon as a tomato starts to turn a little bit purple, it starts to give a little bit color from green, it starts to become a little bit darker, you can actually pick that tomato, and that's even before it has a chance to split. So tomatoes will keep ripening because they, you know, output a gas that, you know, keeps the tomato ripening even after they're picked. So you don't actually have to ripen the tomatoes on the vine. In my opinion, it's better to actually give them a little bit more time on the vine, and they taste a little bit more sweeter. But, you know, if you just pick them a little bit early and let them ripen on your kitchen counter, you know, they'll still be really good eating. All right, this tomato plant has got quite a few tomatoes and also producing bigger tomatoes as well. So let's check it out. Yeah, that's a nice sized tomato. Look at this. That's a good one. So I'm going to stake this up because a couple of tomatoes down there did go bad because they were touching the ground. So let's do it. So let me stake this tomato plant. So I'm going to lift this up, then I'm going to get it closer to this stake. And I'm going to put a string under the plant, and then I'm going to come around and put one on the top side of the plant so it has double support. And then I'm going to tie it to the stake. This is the stake that we are using to stake raspberries in future. So next year we're going to plant a lot more raspberries and blackberries. So we already put stake system in there. I'm using the same stakes to
prop up all of my tomato plants.
Check out all of these trellises. Now these are the trellises we are going to use to stake up raspberries and blackberries. Now this is one of the reasons I couldn't stake my tomato plants either, because I wanted to focus on putting in these trellises rather than putting in wood trellises for Florida weaving or something like that, or the bamboo sticks I showed earlier to stake up the tomatoes, because I needed to get these in the ground so that they're ready to plant some of these raspberries and blackberries this fall and rest of them next spring. All right, time to stake another one. I'm gonna go under the plant. Lift the plant up, like so. Alrighty. Right there. And right here. Alright. Tie in a knot, and this is good to go. And it does have tomatoes. It has this one, nice sized tomato. Oh, another tomato, didn't go bad. Nice. Oh, this one did go bad. This one is bad. See, this one went bad. There's another nice one here. I'll check out this one. Such a nice tomato, and pretty large size too. So I'm glad to save these tomatoes so I can have a lot more tomatoes that are healthy rather than rotten sitting on the ground. All right, next I gotta get this plant up and right, but let me show you a treat. Can you see it? Check it out. That's a nice tomato. Some of the heirloom varieties already produce fewer tomatoes, and when that happens, this is the size you get. So look at this tomato. Pretty nice tomato, pretty big as well. It weighs about a pound, so really good to find these kind of tomatoes. I hope you learned from this video, and I hope you stake your tomatoes and you prune your tomatoes and you keep your tomatoes at a manageable size so that your tomato plants are healthy, and it's also easier for you to pick tomatoes as well. I hope you learned from this video, and I'll see you in another video.